Hey folks, and welcome to my critique of Super Mario World. This is in 3 connected parts. Part 1 is about my history with the game, being able to play it when it launched in North America. Part 2 is how different it is playing the game all these years later, mostly due to the controls, and Part 3 is about the game's difficulty before we wrap up. As always, that is followed by the announcement of the next viewer poll, some additional ideas I had when writing about the game, and talking about the benefits of becoming a patron. Feel free to jump around, watch one part at a time, or the whole thing at once. I hope you enjoy my look back at this platforming classic. They say you can never go back. I was lucky enough to get a Super Nintendo close to its US launch date of August 23, 1991. Earlier, my family had moved from Woodinville, Washington to the Gold Coast of Australia. My dad grew up on the Gold Coast and wanted to move back. Things didn't go well, as it wasn't too long before my mom took me and my sister back to the US for a time, until my parents worked out their differences and we moved back to Australia permanently. Shortly after moving back to the US, I was given a Super Nintendo as a present. It came with the adapters, 2 controllers, and Super Mario World. That game was everything to me. I don't have many memories of my childhood, but I do remember hooking the Super Nintendo up to the TV in a friend's basement, as this was before my mom found us our own place. It was magical. The only downside was having to start the game with 2 players. I was a child going through some turmoil. I wanted this new Mario all to myself, man. I have many fond memories of my time with the Super Nintendo, but playing Super Mario World is the strongest. I can't recall how long it took, but I found every damn secret exit in the game. I don't know how much was due to the amount of time I played it, how much was swapping knowledge on the school playground, and how much was due to reading issues of Nintendo Power. My mum made friends with a guy who worked at Nintendo, and he would gift me issues of the magazine when him and my mum would meet up. Or maybe I had a subscription. As I said, my childhood memories are fuzzy. Over the years, I'd devote time here and there to Super Mario World. I'd start a new game and play a few worlds, and years later I'd test it out in emulators, but this is the first time I have dedicated myself to finishing the game and uncovering its secrets since I was 9 or 10 years old. They say you can never go back. This is true on a couple of levels. The first is I'm no longer a child living in Washington State in the early 90s. I'm now in my early 40s living on the other side of the world. It's said that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. This is the simple change. Watch a movie or read a book you enjoyed in childhood, and if it still holds up, which often isn't the case, you will get something completely different from it. The childlike wonder of Dinosaur Island, of riding Yoshi, of battling the Koopa Kids, and uncovering the game's multitude of secrets hits different now. It's not that the game isn't still enjoyable. I think it's excellent, and we'll discuss why in more detail later, but it's a different beast. I no longer have months to play a game to distract me from the fact that I don't have my dad around and my mum is likely struggling, which, looking back, probably did hit harder as an adoptee. I didn't have years of playing, thinking about, and making videos about video games under my belt. I was a dumb kid who loved Mario, and now I'm a dumb adult who's making a video about that love. So let's move on to the other level of not being able to go back, the hardware. I no longer have a Super Nintendo console or a CRT television. What I do have is a Super Nintendo emulator running on a laptop through a 27-inch 1080p monitor with a shader on it to emulate how the game might have looked back when I first played it. I'm also not playing with the Super Nintendo controller. I'm using an Xbox Series X controller, and even though it has a D-pad, 4 face buttons and 2 bumpers, it is not the same layout or the same feeling. And it is this discrepancy in the controls and thus the game feel of playing Super Mario World that I want to start with. The way Mario controlled back in his first outing on the NES was with 2 buttons laid out horizontally. The A button jumped and the B button performed the double duty of acceleration and shooting fireballs. In Mario 2 and 3, new abilities were mapped to the B button, but the essence of Mario's core movement was through this 2-button horizontal setup. The SNES controller has 4 face buttons, 2 sets of the NES layout stacked on top of each other. However, Super Mario World does not use the same layout as the NES games. Jump is instead mapped to B, and accelerate and other abilities such as shooting fireballs and so much more is mapped right above it to the Y button, but also to the X button as well. This is important because of what the A button is used for. The A button is for the new spin jump. Mario can break blocks, pulverize enemies, and there's a satisfying sound effect to go along with it. Coming from the NES Mario games, of course players are going to assume Mario generally controls the same way, and as a kid, once I saw that cool spin jump with all its utility, why would I ever want to use the regular jump again? It was boring by comparison. And hey, even if it is weird that the alternate button is now above the jump button instead of right next to it, because the X and Y buttons do the same thing, I could choose to accelerate, swing the cape, and make Yoshi eat with the same positioning in my hand. Well, Yoshi complicates matters. If you press spin jump, Mario gets off the back of the dinosaur, so I had to move to the B and Y buttons if I wanted to use Yoshi. But flying solo, it was spin jump all the way, baby! That was until I got to Morton's Castle. In Morton's Castle, I learned what those of you already familiar with how Super Mario World controls have been thinking ever since I started my story. That the spin jump just doesn't have the same height to it. There's a climb in the second section of the castle where platforms are shifting to the left and right, opening up and closing paths for Mario to ascend ever higher until the boss door. I would always keep dying on this one part that I thought impossible to reach until I was playing with a friend, and I think they admonished me for not using the regular jump. That level taught me that the regular jump had its utility, even if it wasn't as cool. In this playthrough, I used the spin jump rarely. It doesn't feel cool to me anymore, and while I still like the sound, I can't handle it going off constantly. It's just like pressing the Y button to make the cape spin. Useful movement to keep Mario safe, but that sound effect in perpetuity? It reminds me of when an old college roommate played Ocarina of Time and rolled everywhere as young Link. It drove me up the wall. Now, auditory processing issues aside, I wanted to bring up the spin jump story not only as a funny anecdote for what Child Dave thought was cool, but how I might not have been the only one. In thinking about the spin jump, it made me realize that Takeshi Tezuka and his team changed the familiar button layout of the old games to give prominence to this new Mario ability. I wonder if they expected its new utility and cool factor to cause younger players to rely on it. I mean, the Mario games are made primarily for children. The focus on dinosaurs and the vibrant color palette in Super Mario World speak to that. But I've also been thinking that maybe the reason I've not been using the spin jump in this playthrough is because of how the face buttons are arranged on the Xbox controller, and how different it is to holding a Super Nintendo controller in my hand. I've often thought about how different games feel when playing them on an emulator, as we don't have access to the original controllers by default. I've come across this hurdle in my Atari and NES project videos, but it's also something that occurs when playing PC ports of console games before X input was popularized. A game is tested and fine-tuned with a primary controller and control layout as it's designed. Sure, my Xbox controller has a D-pad, 4 face buttons, and 2 bumpers, but they're not in the same part of the controller. They're not the same size, they don't feel the same to press, and the SNES controller didn't have a right analog stick in the way the face buttons, or triggers to deal with. It also didn't help that I forgot to assign the diagonals to the D-pad in the emulator, and then it was a while until I realized that I had mixed up 2 of the directions. Whoops! The reason I bring up triggers is that it was around the Forest of Illusion that I became frustrated with some of the challenges the game was throwing at me. It didn't help that I found 1-ups to be useless, since after a reset, the game defaults Mario to 5 lives and no power-ups. It was here when I started using save states in the emulator, and to make things easier, I binded them to the left and right triggers of the Xbox controller. Sometimes during a rough jump, I would accidentally hit the right trigger, loading the last save state and nullifying my progress. Whoops! I was thinking about my Disco Elysium critique, how I brought up the reasons I was save scumming before dice rolls, and if using save states in an emulator could be seen as a similar transgression. I think it's helping that I'm playing Turbo Overkill as I'm writing this. It's a modern FPS emulating one from the 90s. Until checkpointing became more ubiquitous, I would hit F5 to quick save my game every minute or 2 in an FPS, mostly after a tough firefight. There were times when this got me into trouble, but generally having control over your own save can be a godsend. It's just a gray area with Mario because such a benefit was not in the original game. Which returns me to the Xbox controller and emulation. You can't go back again. My controller feels different. The hardware I'm using is different. I'm at a different point in my life, and I am able to save and load the game whenever I damn well please. Playing Super Mario World in 2024 is different. And while I have the memories of playing the game as my 10-year-old self, they are clashing with this current playthrough. So finally, let's talk about Super Mario World itself. How did you find out about Top Secret Area? When I entered the first ghost house, I was worried I wouldn't remember the secret exit, but no joke, the instant that first room loaded and I saw the sea of specters swimming above, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Take a running jump and fly up the side. I just can't remember how I originally found out about it. It could have been by accident. Once the cape is introduced, there's a desire to fly above the ground of every stage if the game lets you. It's not far-fetched to believe I flew up, saw the door or the room above, and the rest is history. But it's also plausible that either a friend told me or I found out about it reading Nintendo Power. It's an early enough secret for any old game magazine to spoil. It's just trickier to think that I did it on my own, because while any normal level with a secret exit flashes red on the map, the ghost houses don't. I guess it's fair to assume they all have secret exits being ghost houses, but aside from the first entry to Star Road, I mostly found the main exit of these places and moved on to the next stage. The reason I bring up Top Secret Area is how powerful a secret it is. Anytime I had trouble getting through a stage, one of my first solutions was to go back to Top Secret Area, load up on Fireflowers, Capes, and Yoshi, return to the offending level, and see if that could help get me through. The Capes' slow glide and ability to swirl away most opposition, combined with the extra hit Yoshi allows, can render most platforming or enemy challenges obsolete. There's also a chance that a couple extra hits will allow Little Mario to make it to the end of the level. The only issue was that after uncovering Donut Secret 1, I made a decision, a quite boneheaded one I might add, that I would play through the main levels until I got to Bowser's Castle before going back and uncovering all the secrets. This meant that every time I wanted to top up my resources at Top Secret Area, I had to trek through every area of Dinosaur Island there and back. If I had uncovered Star Road as I went, it would have been much less of a headache. At least I uncovered most of the Switch Palaces as I went through the game. Different opinions on the Switch Palaces are discussions about Super Mario World's difficulty. Despite fans using the assets of Super Mario World to create some of the most fiendish Mario levels in existence through Kaizo ROM hacks, there's a consensus that Super Mario World is an easy game, and the Switch Palaces adding blocks over pits and walls that Mario can run up make an easy game even easier. That the player can't turn them off when on is a further sticking point. I'm now going to talk about the difficulty of Super Mario World and the Switch Palaces in turn. As Mario games go, I don't think Super Mario World is difficult. There were moments of difficulty certainly. Getting the secret exit on Cheese Bridge and then swimming through Soda Lake is a tough challenge. Finding the right exits in Forest of Illusion or the crushing maze in Valley of Bowser 2 stick out in my mind. And then there's the special levels once you get through Star Road. The special levels are worth talking about because I think Star Road and its special levels are the seed of the Kaizo ROM hack spirit. There's a mix of trying out fun things with the level mechanics, such as the spin jump romp in Star World 1, or that Star World 3 is a single screen puzzle, alongside seeing how far the difficulty can be pushed. Let me complain about a couple challenges I found particularly nasty. Let's start by just repeating what I wrote in my notes about the level named Tubular. And I quote, "Navigating Balloon Mario around obstacles while finding new balloon power-ups to keep flight for an extended period of time? F*** off!" The level named Awesome has a lot of dodging punted shells while on ice, and then later on bullet bills start firing. Yikes. It's fun if you grab the star, but the game doesn't have many opportunities to get used to the ice physics, which is one reason it can feel like such a brutal challenge. Mondo strikes me as a failed experiment. The water rises and lowers, with enemies that require Mario to have a full range of movement. Without power-ups in Yoshi, I think this one would be near impossible, and that leaves us with outrageous. It sure is. This is more about a tightly packed grouping of hazardous enemies and using momentum, or a well-timed bouncing off an enemy to make it over the giant pipes. I enjoyed the other special stages for what they were trying to do, although I used the cape to bypass most of the final special stage called Gnarly. When the coin spelled out you are a super player, I said in response, "Yes, I am." Now back to the Switch Palaces. Whenever I played a new two-player game of Super Mario World with a friend, I would always go to Yoshi's Island 2 first, hoping that they'd play Yoshi's Island 1, and I could giddily collect some 1-ups in the coin bonanza that is the Yellow Switch Palace. Am I the only one that would spin jump onto the Switch to freeze Mario in an odd frame of his animation? Anyway, after the Yellow Switch Palace, the other three are kind of a disappointment. There's only one extra life to collect, and solving the puzzle of how to get it is that much trickier. I also forgot about the Red Switch Palace until I was on my secret exits run late in the game. It really feels like a player should be hitting the switches as they make their way through Dinosaur Island, even though they're only mandatory for some of the secret levels. And there's no question the switches make the game easier. They're a way to make jumps trivial or to signpost secret areas. I can sympathize with not wanting the added help, and yet like I said in the last paragraph, turning them on feels like a necessity for clearing the game. Personally, I welcome their addition. When I saw yellow, green, or blue blocks, it made me feel my progression through Dinosaur Island, and I'll never balk at any extra assistance. In Super Mario Wonder, I kept the extra blocks badge on until I was collecting all the seeds I missed post Bowser. But yes, at least in that game, the choice is up to the player. Super Mario World is not my favorite 2D Mario game. that would be its sequel, Yoshi's Island, but it's up there. Part of it is the reason I outlined in the first section. Right place, right time, right age. Coming back to it all these years later reminds me of just what a solid entry in the Mario series it is. Not only in launching a more advanced piece of hardware in the Super Nintendo, but taking the experimentation seen in Super Mario Bros. 3, streamlining it, and changing the game's focus from strict platforming aptitude to exploration of secret exits and the changing of the world map due to the player's actions. Oh, how I loved when Bowser's cragged face rose out of the water after completing the Ghost Ship. And out of all the amusing vignettes that play after Mario defeats a Koopa Kid, my favorite is Ludwig's castle, when it lands on a hill in the distance and the poor thing dons a bandage that it sports for the rest of the game. I could go on about little details and memories from my time with Super Mario World, and maybe in the epilogue I'll go through some more of them, but despite issues with the controls, particularly the lack of programmed leeway for jumping off and landing on precarious platforms, and the exactness needed to throw a shell upwards to hit a block, the game was a lot of fun. The reason I didn't go into these examples earlier is that through tricks like facing backwards to halt momentum, or relying on the cape's float ability, a lot of these issues can be overcome, and I honestly didn't know if any struggles I had in regard to how the game felt to play were due to my choice of controller or not. This is not the same Super Mario World I played back in 1991. How can it be? I'm not the same person I was 33 years ago, and I'm not using the same controller or the same hardware. They say you can never go back, but that doesn't mean that you can't find a new appreciation and enjoyment for an old favorite here in the present. Given enough years, you might even experience that joy more than once in a lifetime. I still think Super Mario World is a great game here in 2024. I wonder what I'll think of it in 2057. Thanks for watching. Hey folks! I hope you enjoyed the video. It's now time to vote on the next critique video. The two games not chosen in the last poll were Red Dead Redemption and Tunic. The third game to choose from, picked by my lovely patrons, and finalized by me because the poll was a tie and I had the deciding vote, is, drumroll, Baldur's Gate. Most likely the enhanced edition, but I'm open to be persuaded to play the original. The poll is on my community page and will be linked in a pinned comment below. I'll leave it up for a week, and then the same comment will link the winner. Once again, the options are Red Dead Redemption, Tunic, and Baldur's Gate. Choose wisely. Now, when I'm taking notes on a game, there will be ideas I have that won't make it into the script. I like to talk about some of them here in a section I call deleted scenes. The big one for this critique is how I decided to take notes. I had a wild idea that I would make a video talking about every level in Super Mario World. So after I played each level, I alt-tabbed out of my emulator to my word processor and wrote it. It didn't take long, however, to notice I didn't have much to say about a lot of the stages. So I scrapped the idea about halfway through playing the game, even though I continued to take notes after every level. In the critique, I mentioned that I might give more examples of details I loved, so here's one for you. Larry's Castle, the final Koopa Kid's fortress, has one of my favorite moments in the game, just for the sheer audacity of it. Earlier, in Roy's Castle, the game introduces a snake platform. You have to ride it as it twists and turns around the level. It does that thing where it loops under Mario, so you have to wait until you run out of platform to stand on, dropping down onto the snake below. I love that stuff. And then in Larry's Castle, the snake is taken up a notch. Bam! It winds through a much larger area. The snake platform moves around swinging maces, and you have to jump on rest blocks to wait for the snake to get into a position where you can jump back on it. I mentioned how the Star Road and special levels seemed like it was the designers seeing how far they could push certain game mechanics, without them being unfair. The secret stages have this ethos, but I like this example of the twin snakes because it's along the main path of the game and the Koopa Kid castles are meant to be difficult. If you're interested in more perspectives on Super Mario World, there were 3 pieces I found that helped inform this video. Links to them are in the description. And finally, we come to the portion of the epilogue where I tell you about my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can vote in the Patreon polls and get access to monthly updates. For $3, you get to see the videos before everyone else, and for $9, I'll thank you at the end of these videos. I also have a Ko-fi page for one-time donations. If you can't afford it, I understand. And if you still want to help the channel, a like, a subscribe, or sharing the video with your friends will go a long way. Thank you. So until next time, I hope you're all well, are enjoying your gaming, and are having a wonderful day.